My name is Richard Murphy. I am the managing director, I suppose, of Richard Murphy Architects Limited. And the office has been running for almost 28 years. And our office is in the centre of Edinburgh. And we have done and are doing a very large variety of work. I mean, the office goes up and down with the state of the economy, of course. And we are very proud that we've got a mantelpiece full of awards over the years, and we continue to try and do interesting creative work in all sorts of areas, which I think is quite unusual, because I think at the moment a lot of architects are sort of specialising, and we don't do that. That's both good and bad. It's good in the sense it keeps our mind lively, if you like, but it's not very good in terms of the current procurement climate, because you have to specialise to get a job. So if you're not a specialist, you don't get the job. So that's a tricky one. But so we're kind of busy at the moment. We've been through a bit of a trough, but we're coming back up again now.
Where did your architectural interest kind of first develop?
Well, it's a funny one, really. My mum reckons Lego, actually. But
Favourite, yeah?
yeah, it kind of happened by accident. At school, I was good at music has always been my first love, but I kind of knew that I didn't want to do that professionally, keep that as a hobby in a way, and it still is actually. But geography was what I was good at school, and they were going to put me in for Oxford and Cambridge geography, and they set me and a mate a special essay once about what is geography, and I went home and thought about it and realised it was a sort of donut subject, lots of peripheral things, but nothing in the middle, and I just came in on Monday, I did the essay and said, I don't want to do this. It caused a bit of a friction. I pulled in front of the headmaster and he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. He said, what about town planning? So I thought, okay, well, I read some books on town planning, and then my local university, Manchester, had a town planning department open day. So me and a mate went along one Saturday, and it was actually very, very boring. And then one of the classic things happened in life by accident. I opened the wrong door, and they shared a building with the architecture school, which was not open to the public, but the students were all in working. And it was a complete contrast. It was not long after '68, and there were slogans all over the world. They were smoking dope. There were geodesic domes. They were going to save the world and the planet and everything. And it was really interesting. And loads and loads of models. And I liked making models. And so I spent most of the day talking to them, and came home and thought that might be interesting. But I've never thought of myself as a sort of natural architect. I sort of stumbled into it. And then I went to Newcastle University, and I must say the first 2 terms I found it very difficult. I think you don't know what architecture is for a long time, actually. And then luckily I did a good project in the 3rd term and got a bit of self-confidence, and I've never looked back, actually.
What was that project?
Oh, it was it's in first year. It was a boathouse for the University Boats Club on the Tyne at Newburn.
Okay. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it was a total rip-off of James Stirling's red brick and patent glazing period. Yeah. I was the only person who thought of putting the clubhouse on top of the boathouse. Everyone had them as like 2 buildings, and I put one on top of the other. And I worked, I think I did a double all-nighter where I worked 2 nights on the row. So I was pretty, I was very keen. And I had fun at Newcastle. It knocked a few corners off me. It was a very rough city in those days. I think it's changed now. And I ended up being president of the union, so I took an extra year out to do that. And then that was quite interesting because I was out of sync with all my chums, and I got a job initially in the west coast of Ireland, and then I had a lucky break and moved to a little Caribbean island called St. Lucia and worked there, and was given too much responsibility. Ended up designing and seeing a building built in the 7 months I was in St. Lucia, which was extraordinary, an office building. But I did other things, and one thing that was quite interesting, which I think has influenced my life, is that, in that climate, it never went cold. And so you could leave a wall off a building. So you made houses which were effectively like deep verandas because it never went cold. You had to deal a bit with security, maybe, and sometimes high winds. And it took me about a month to realise that you didn't need walls, and we had tricks like you left the roof off over the shower because if it rained, more water, So it was fun, and I've always enjoyed that idea that a building can transform itself between summer and winter, and particularly in Scotland, the further north you go, so there's such a huge contrast in light. And I like to make buildings which can completely open up the landscape when they can. It's that old, it's a modern movement idea, but it's, when I give talks about our work, I sometimes say the modern movement was very good at summertime architecture, but not so good on the winter, you know. And I like closing down. This house is a good essay in how things absolutely all close down in the winter, and at this time of year, all open up. So I think that idea probably started in St Lucia, actually. And then I was writing to people about, because I didn't want to go back to Newcastle. I had a good time, but the B-Arch course was not that good, and I ended up having to make a sort of last-minute decision about whether to spend 2 years in London and 2 years in Edinburgh. And again, by chance, I picked up some hitchhikers on the way back from an interview in London where they'd offered me a post, but I had to be there back in 3 days' time with a flat and ready to go. You know, I was a bit panicky. And I picked up these two Scottish guys, and they said, well, everyone ends up in London sometime in their life, which indeed I did. Why don't you have 2 years in Edinburgh? And that seemed to be quite a good convincing argument. And I'd been up here a few times when we'd been in Newcastle, liked the place. So I ended up in Edinburgh and in the school here and the university, which actually, to be blunt, at that time was a bit of a disappointment. It wasn't as good as I'd been made out to be. But in my final year, basically, me and a few students took the thing over, and we ran a extremely good and quite provocative student architect society and invited all the lecturers, ran conferences, ran a magazine, got rid of the professor and did also, I was, you know, my student activism kind of went out, and we did a lot of things then, and it was kind of fun. So we just made our own education. And in fact, the visiting lecturers were the education, in my opinion. And so I've always been quite kind to students when they phone up and say, can you come and give a talk at Invercocker University? And it's a pain in the arse, and only about 15 people turn up and you don't get paid and whatnot. But actually you think, well, actually I benefited from that.
Yeah, that's
so you keep on giving back, really. So then I left with debt, of course. So I thought I'll try and get a holiday job in Edinburgh. And I got a job for a firm, Simpson & Brown, who were and are predominantly a conservation firm. But I didn't do the conservation work. I did sort of little work to, you know, extensions to arts and crafts houses and things. But I learnt my trade there. They were very good. I used to have, I mean, James Simpson is a very good friend of mine, and I've told him to his face that we don't agree about much at all, you know. But I enjoyed the conversations, actually, and it was a very friendly office, very fun office, and they taught me a few things. They taught me how to survey a building, which turned out to be quite useful when I got into my Scarpa survey. But then I did a year's full-time teaching in university when somebody went to America, and I was doing a bit part-time, and so I left Simpson & Brown, did a year's teaching, not quite knowing what I was going to do at the end of it. And the visiting professor was Richard McCallum, who became a real hero of mine, actually. And I got to the end of that year, and he sort of said, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I don't know, why don't you come down to London? So I'd bought a house and smashed it up, of course, but hadn't put it back together again. So I spent a summer vacation working like mad to finish the work on the house. I was doing it myself. It taught me a lesson never to do your own DIY. And then when I let it out, fun enough, one of the guys who I let it out to was Bill Dunster, the sort of eco-architect man, you know, when he was a student. And small world, and went down to London and have a wonderful time with Richard. I really, because the office was quite small, about 12 of us, and they're on the cusp of doing all these interesting projects in Oxford and Cambridge colleges, and they mined that seam. And I got on very, very well with Richard, and I got on very well with his partner, Peter Jemison. And I enjoyed London, but I suddenly realised, you know, if I sold my house, I couldn't even afford a dog kennel in Hackney, you know. So that was a bit depressing. And then Izzy Metzstein became the professor at the University in Edinburgh, and he rang up one day and said, there's a junior teaching post here for a couple of years. Would you be interested in coming back? And I'd seen the building in Castelvecchio in 1982, and there was nothing published on it in those days. And I'd had the idea that it might be fun to do a survey, because I'd gone back with students and talked to Magagnato, who was the director, and he had told me that there was no final drawing to the building, and it had planted a seed in my mind that it'd be a fun thing to do, to go and do a big survey of the building and actually put on an exhibition. That's all it was. And that's what started, and I did that in Edinburgh when I was I had to wait till I was full-time teaching, and I went off with 3 students in the first summer vacation, measured the whole thing, and then worked like mad for a year to do all the drawings in pencil. Got a whole bunch of students back 2 weekends before term started in the autumn, and they turned my drawings into ink drawings. And then we worked like crazy to put on an exhibition. We borrowed some Scarpa drawings, which was the first time they'd been seen outside Italy. Put on the exhibition. The exhibition then went to London, and then a publisher saw it and then said, let's do a book. So I then got really involved in all the research I taught myself Italian, went and talked to the craftsmen, did all the research on the drawings and wrote the book, and then left the university. So I was teaching there for 4 years, and then decided if I didn't leave then, I mean, I wasn't doing any design work. I did one house extension, but I mean, otherwise I was just so absorbed in doing this book, and also basically you know what it's like. The willing guy gets everything to do. I was running everything at the university, you know, the lectures, the exhibitions, you name it. So I was a bit exhausted, and I got picked up by Allsop and Lyle to open an office for them in Edinburgh, which was they were not my kind of architects, but they were a lot more interesting than the locals, so I thought that'd be fun. And then 2 years later, we got dumped in the recession, and the two partners split up. And I had luckily won an RIS open competition for Inview Gardens restaurant, which never got built. They cancelled it a week before we started on site. And the National Trust for Scotland wouldn't let it go to London. And so I had to choose whether to basically take my job and myself to a local architect or open my own office. So I opened my own office. There were two of us. And that was in 1991. And then, as I say, the rest is history.